And welcome back to a fresh episode of the Business Growth Show. I'm your host, Sam Dunning, co-owner over at webchoiceuk.com. And if you haven't done so yet, check out our weekly email where we're sharing actionable website and marketing tips, useful podcasts, free goodies, resources, and much more to kick off your week with a bang each and every Monday. Why not give it a shot over at businessgrowth.email? So joining me today, I've got Nicole Gates. Nicole's the Director of Marketing over at Mongoose. She's a B2B marketing leader specializing in demand gen, creative content, social media campaigns, and building online communities for brands. Nicole, very warm welcome. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. So excited to chat. We're going to be talking about a pretty fresh topic. I was just discussing with you off air. We haven't talked about webinars for this show for about 2 years. So I'm looking forward to digging in. We're going to be sharing how our audience, how everyone can grow a community through webinars. So
Yes.
yeah, it's gonna be a good one. So first and foremost, Nicole, I thought webinars were dying off. I thought the days of using webinars to pass leads to sales was long lost. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I know. It's, email's dead, SEO's dead, webinars been dead. So, as with all of those things, that's not always the case. I think it's just more around how people are using webinars and,
Right.
how I've seen most people use webinars. They're kind of glorified product demos almost, and they're not really serving any purpose to the people who attend the webinars. So, that's usually where I see most companies going wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's it. I mean, I've got the mindset. To be fair, I've never done that many myself because I'm usually busy with a podcast, and every
Yeah.
now and then I might get invited on a webinar. And surprisingly, I think I've shared this on the show, but I got invited to a software company's webinar a while back, and it was just talking about shifts in marketing, and that was actually one of the best free tools that I've done in terms of generating qualified leads for our company that ever. So they literally invited me to speak on this webinar, probably at 1 week's notice, and I thought, what the heck, might as well do it. And we had, I think, 3 call-ins and a couple form submissions, all within kind of 45 minutes of me being on this guest webinar. So
It's
for me,
great.
I've had great experiences, but I know a lot of companies that I've spoken to kind of see them, like I alluded to there, as kind of a glorified product demos, like you shared, kind of forcing kind of email sign-ups, shifting those off to sales as qualified leads, and it never really works that
Yeah.
well. So I'm excited to dig in and talk about how we can flip that on its head, how it can actually be a useful tool for building community. So yeah, let's kind of share. Let's talk about kind of examples you've seen and how it can be a useful tool for businesses and your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all stems down to what you're trying to get out of the webinar. So, like
Right.
you alluded to, um, a lot of the times people, it's a little bit clickbaity where they'll have some sort of exciting title that gets people to register. And then, 10 minutes in, it turns into a product demo, and the marketing team just sends over all the attendees and registrant lists over to sales and calls it, here's an MQL. We've generated all these leads for you. Here you go.
Yeah.
And then, it's probably not that great. It's not going to convert so well, but maybe you got some interest, and then sales is like, let's do another webinar, and you do another one, and suddenly you don't have anybody registering. No one
Yeah.
wants to come back. Like you've kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
lost that initial kind of growth that you might have had. So I think shifting how you approach webinars and seeing it more as a nurture and a community builder
Okay.
really can help elevate your webinar strategy. I've seen it. I've done it myself, probably in the last 3 companies that I've worked for, and seen it work really, really well. And
Mm,
I think the number one thing is not selling. It's not a place to start selling and pitching your product.
right.
It's more about driving value, educating the market, and using it as an opportunity to really, communicate with your target audience or your ICP. Similarly, like how you're doing here with a podcast, but on a much, larger scale, where we have about 200 people who attend our webinars
Sure.
weekly, which is fantastic. And it's a great way to, you're interviewing customers, you're interviewing prospects, you know exactly what's on their mind, what trends and topics they're frustrated with. And it just helps continuously generate more content and more
Yeah.
ideas for you in the future.
Yeah. It sounds almost like what you're doing is like a live conversation with your target
hmm
market, which
Yeah,
is
we don't do, like having a slides deck or a presentation. We have
sure.
two co-hosts, and then we encourage everybody to come on with their screens on as well and participate in the conversation. And we'll usually pick a topic that, we know is resonating or is something that everyone's interested in. And while we'll have a like an outline of what we want to talk about. We do keep it pretty free flowing so people can come in, ask questions, put something in the chat, and just utilize the chat to kind of have a conversation and see what people are thinking and the feedback that we're getting on that topic.
Awesome. Yeah, I like it. So with that in mind, if a company is doing a webinar, in your opinion, Nicole, what should be the main goals? What should be the main results that you're actually aiming for from it?
hmm I could see it as, it's a little bit of top of a funnel tactic. So it'd be more
Hmm.
about getting in front of your target audience, growing some leads, I guess, in terms of getting people to register, and then using it to understand your target audience, but also you're creating content from it. So we use it to slice and dice into social media, paid advertising, um, put it on our podcast, on our blog. So using it as a way to kind of get in front of the audience, but also then use that content for other things and start positioning yourself as a thought leader
Right.
within your space. We've
Okay.
seen a lot of success where people are saying, like, we do a lot of surveys out to our registrants and seeing like what they want to see and everything, and everybody's saying that it's like one of the most useful tools for them, specifically in the higher ed market where we are. um, they just see it as like a really useful tool where they can come in, learn something really valuable, and take away without having to do any sort of transaction with us.
Got it. Got it. So it sounds like there's quite a lot of benefits in terms of both having the target prospects, having your target audience in there, asking you
hmm
questions live, getting feedback, understanding what they want to know right now, as well as I guess nurturing it over time on subtly on what your company offers and being positioned as a useful resource. And then also the other aspect of it that you can slice and dice the video content, the audio content that's produced, and like you mentioned, put it into a podcast, a video series, get some nice
Yep,
mini clips for LinkedIn, for socials, and all that juicy stuff,
exactly.
just like we do with the show and many other shows do too. So it sounds like quite a useful exercise on that front. Um, how do from your experience, how do webinars actually build a community? Is it from what we've shared there, or is a bit more to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that if you treat the people who attend and register not as sales prospects, but more as just like a community that you're trying to build, and you're not just sending over those contact leads to immediately be sent followed up with sales. You
Yeah.
can really see some really good traction, and if you are really providing a lot of great value to them as well, you're going to just see that grow. So we kickstarted our webinar series back in February, and I think we have around 2,500 people coming. And because we don't pitch, like, there's opportunities for people to put their hands up. We do have some lead scoring in the background and some self attribution forms around, so we can make sure we can track success of it. But that's not the ultimate goal of that. And I think the ultimate goal is like, we're trying to nurture, we're trying to educate, and we're not trying to sell. And so people appreciate that. They keep coming back. They're sharing it with their friends, they're sharing it with their colleagues, and we're seeing just really continual growth there versus like an email drip campaign where you
Hmm.
start seeing drop offs as the email campaign goes. We're seeing an increase in more nurture sequences with that.
Interesting. Interesting stuff. So, from your experience, how effective can a webinar be, say, compared to the rest of a marketing mix that a company might take on board? Have you seen it like over time generate a good chunk of inbound leads and revenue from your sales team, or is it kind of moderate compared to other channels, say, that you might do on, I don't know, pay per click or SEO or field marketing and events? What have you kind of seen in those type of results?
Yeah, I mean, with anything, attribution is hard, and it's
Sure.
all a mix of everything.
Yeah.
But since we started our webinar series, we're tracking the pipeline throughout the different channels. And, we're seeing an increase in direct, organic, and actually paid channels since we've been doing this webinar series. And, originally we were kind of just like, oh, people are finding your blog, or our ad keywords are just really spot on. But when you started to dig in deeper, it was actually just brand keywords that were driving all of those channels. And so you start to realize that probably the webinar and using the webinar to kind of facilitate most of your content strategy is really driving the increase in those organic, brand, or direct and paid channels.
Yeah, because I suppose it's fuel for the fire almost, like you were talking about earlier. Like if you can create all this content that's literally answering quite a lot of your community's questions, people that are
Right.
potential prospects, and then you can position that using demand generation plays, i.e. chop that up into little useful videos, distribute that on LinkedIn ads in front of your target market. If that was, for example, I don't know, marketing officers, marketing directors, or whoever your
Right.
player is, you're literally giving them content that's interesting to them, and then positioning yourself as a go-to brand over time, I guess.
Yeah. And, like I always believe in, work smarter, not harder. And, having kind of that main hub, which for us is the webinar series, to facilitate the rest of your content for the rest of your channels is such
Mm,
like an easy way to kind of just always be producing content, always have content on hand, and
yeah.
always be getting immediate feedback, whether it's live on the webinars or, comments on social media that kind of
Hmm.
facilitate next week's themes or topics or guests that we bring on. And it just becomes kind of like a content demand engine almost that you can just have working on the side while you're doing, more little experiments or testing other things or maybe doing product launches or what other priorities you kind of have going on within the
Yeah,
marketing team, which we know we have a lot.
sure. I think it's one of those things, right? Content is quite often, with organizations I've dealt with and our own, it's sometimes quite tricky to think of topics on the spot. So there's
Yes.
there's nothing better than literally ripping stuff, answering audiences' questions. Because for one, if you've got industry experts in there, you know the answers, they're straightforward for you, and it's natural conversation. It's not forced. It's not like talking in front of a camera, which I do too much of. So it's yeah, I like it. So let's take this. Let's give some actionables for our audience, as we like to do. Let's walk through a step by step, Nicole, of how, if a company's tuning in now and they're thinking, "Oh, I like the sound of these webinars. They actually sound better than I first anticipated." Let's talk through almost an A to Z of the beginning, what you need to think about before you set up your webinar, right through to and repurposing, which we've talked about now. So, what are some of the first steps if we're an organization and we think, yeah, we've perhaps got a little bit of budget or a little bit of resources that we can assign to this? What should be the first thing that you think about before you get stuck in?
Yeah, I'd say step number one is getting buy-in from the rest of the organization, especially sales, so that you are aligned on what the purpose and objective of the webinars are going to be. That's usually critical to the success of it. But then step two would be talking to customers, prospects, listening to sales calls,
Right.
really understanding what those key problems are that your target market's having. So before we even started, we did a lot of customer listening, a lot of feedback from sales, listening to prospect calls, and kind of understanding what those key blockers are and
Okay.
what those key topics are. And so before we even launched the webinar, we kind of had an idea of what 3 to 4 of the main topics were, and we launched it with probably the most sought after topic, which is not the most like attractive topic in the world, but it was around
Hmm.
compliance and texting compliance. But we
Right.
found that all of the schools and universities that are in our target market, they
Yep.
really were concerned about being compliant. And so we put something like, here's how to stay compliant in 2022, and we gave a free resource with a texting policy. And we ended up, like, I think we sold out. I don't know what the official term is. Our Zoom like allowance that we had at the time, which I
Nice.
think was a
Yeah. Yeah.
thousand. We ended up having to do a second webinar series just to kind of make sure we were getting everybody in who wanted to see it. And
Yep.
so kickstarting it with a topic that is really going to resonate. You can do some testing first if you want to, in terms of like paid advertising, maybe doing some social media posts. I often kind of put out topics on my own LinkedIn to see like what kind of feedback and if this resonates with the audience a little bit, to kind of test, and then we'll put it out into our webinar. And then once you kind of have ideas on topics and themes and blockers that you want to cover,
Yep.
making sure you figure out what that format looks like. So for us, we wanted it to be very conversational. We didn't want to have to do PowerPoints. We also wanted it to be an easy lift, and an easier lift is just kind of going in and like this, talking to a camera. Ideally, it's better when you got someone else kind of interacting with you. So we do have 2 co-hosts, but we also
Sure thing.
encourage everybody else to have their cameras on. But figuring out what format works best for you. So that's kind of, I guess, the
Yeah.
first steps in terms of just kicking it off.
Yeah. Let's break that down a bit. So we've got, first off, buy-in with your internal team, your sales team, and I guess whoever else is going to be working on the project or following up with leads, whatever it may be.
Yep.
Is that, from your experience, very difficult, Nicole? Is that something that's quite easy, or is there usually
I
quite a lot
don't
of turbulence and pushback?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily difficult, but I've had experiences where I kind of ran too fast with things and then had to kind of pedal back. So that's why, I've lived and learned. And so now my first step is always to get buy-in. And usually if you can always approach the conversation, understanding the other person's shoes, which in this case would be like sales or the leadership team, and which usually ties down to revenue, and explaining it in a way that benefits them and shows why this change is going to help them in the long run,
Yeah.
really helps. And, there's a lot of conversation around short term versus long term results. And this is a little bit of a longer term play than typical webinar strategies. But in the long run, you do see it's educating your market out on the channels that they're already on. And by the time they come into sales, they're ready to buy, which, is a salesperson's dream, that they're just like, yeah, here's my money. Like, let me know where to sign the contract.
Yeah. I mean, for me, and I'd be biased because I've done this kind of stuff for ages, but just the fact that it's almost a content engine means
Hmm.
that you're kind of saving money and resource on getting a third party to film those things for you, record those things for you, and all that stuff. So it splits a lot of things into one. Yes, you spend some time, you spend some resources doing this, but then once you've done it, you can get a heck of a lot of replay value out of it. So I
Hmm.
think that alone, as well as all the other benefits that we'll chat about, is big for sure. Cool. And then you mentioned kind of talking to customers, listening to sales calls for these kind of problems, these frustrations to fuel the content, the topic ideas for the webinars.
Yeah. So just really understanding what those themes are within your target audience so that when you are announcing these webinars, it's not like how product X can fix this. It's more of like, here's 5 ways to better market or communicate with students, is like a really broad example. But
Yeah.
really knowing that you're speaking to specific problems that your target audience is really having. So that's why I always encourage, like, even my team, like, I encourage them to be listening to a certain amount of customer calls, a certain amount of sales calls, because that's
Yeah.
where kind of the best topics come up. And,
Oh, for
sales
sure.
and client success have different objectives with those calls. And you might hear something that they might miss. And you're just like, wow, this topic keeps coming up a lot when I'm listening to this. Maybe we can create some content around it. So this isn't a problem every
Yeah.
time the sales team is having a demo call.
Definitely. The great thing about doing that as well is that if you then, as we've talked about a lot, repurpose that content, and if you make
Hmm.
specific clips, whether that is video and then you stick it on YouTube after it's edited, or audio, or then you do an article on your website, that content is searchable and
Yep.
it's got real demand for it because your customers are bringing this up as a question or a problem a lot. That means other customers must be too. So they're probably
Yep.
literally searching like how to do X or best ways to fix Y. And then if you stick it on your website as a useful article, put it on YouTube, that's searchable. It's going to build more, it's
Yep.
going to capture more demand over the time, educate more of the market, and over time generate more inbound for your business. So it's really smart, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
I've actually seen really good success with breaking it down and then putting it into paid social
Yeah,
campaigns as well. And
cool.
then using that in my retargeting campaigns for people who visited the website but maybe didn't take an action. Or, people who are in like lookalike audiences closer to my ICP, just
Yeah,
to again get that content and in front of the right eyes, and have them really understand like the problems that we can help them solve.
awesome. I like it. Okay, good. And then talked about the format. I know you shared a few ideas on that. Any best practices you think when it comes to webinars and how you actually format them?
Yeah, I do kind of like the more live interaction. I think
Mm.
people, when people talk about webinars are dead, I think they talk about, having the slide deck up and you're going
Oh yeah,
through and it's, like your typical kind of process. So I think steering clear from that is best, but I know that kind of scares people. So at first, when we were moving towards this, we did a few test ones before we launched the series. We would have slides, I felt like they were kind of a little bit of a safety net, but they're very vague and they didn't have a lot of text. It was kind of more like image heavy so that there was more of that conversation just to get the people who were used, like speaking on our webinars, kind of used to just talking on the fly and not having to have a script or, something to go through. But
sure.
I've seen the best success happen when you're just similar to this, but on a larger scale, just having a conversation, allowing people to come in and have questions that you'd not anticipate, but then it might open up a whole new topic
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
resonates with everybody who's listening.
Mm. I need to try that on this show, really. Question and answers, live audience style, just like you're doing, just like State
It
of Demand Gen with Chris Walker.
Right.
It's a
Yeah. It
smart move.
definitely opens up a lot more complexities. Like here's great because you can just focus on, me and you are just talking, but
Yep.
we have someone that's kind of in the background, like answering questions in chat or, making sure the technical side is all kind of set up because with we use Zoom as like
Sure.
for our tech, and you can't use Zoom webinars, which gives you a lot of those. You have to use Zoom meetings and there's not as much control. So there's some technical things. People are unmuting when they shouldn't be muted, when they should be
Yeah,
muted,
yeah.
So you kind of have to have someone in the background making sure
Bit of
things are going
admin.
smoothly so
Got it.
that the host can just focus on the topic at hand.
Sure. So yeah, so you need, like you rightly said, you need to make sure you probably struggle if it was just one host trying to manage everything.
Yes.
You probably want someone on admin, kind of unmuting stuff, getting people queued up to take the questions, and
Yeah.
all those good points.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, that's interesting. And if anyone's tuning in and they think the Business Growth Show should do a live Q&A, get in touch on businessgrowth.marketing, and if we get enough demand, we'll make one happen. Cool. So those are the first few points. Once you have sorted that, Nicole,
Mhm.
what should come next? Should we start finding guests for the show? Should we get internal guests? Should we start promoting it, or what's the logical next step?
I think at first, doing a few on your own. The whole point is to really position your company as thought leaders, and you don't want to rely immediately too heavily on guests. So I think kind of, figuring it out, there's some tweaks that are always, need to be ironed out when you're first kind of starting off a series. You kind of find your rhythm. So I'd recommend first, just hosting it by yourself, not bringing in guests,
Yeah.
and seeing what traction comes in. And
Okay.
then start seeing where guests might fit in. And so having those first few and some of those like results really helped us kind of bring in guests, because then you can kind of show the benefit already. And so we actually, when we first reached out to some influencers in the higher ed market to
Yeah.
come on and co-host with us, they were similarly to you, like, well, what is this? Just like a pitch for our product? Like, I don't understand why I'm on here. And we have to like explain to them, like, no, that's not how we approach this.
Yeah.
So it was good to show examples of like, here's previous ones that we've done, here's results, here's feedback that we're getting. And it helped convince a lot more of our guests to come on. And now actually we have like a waiting list already
Awesome.
for people to come on to our show. But I would say a learning with bringing on guests, which we can talk more detail into like how to approach that. But
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
a
Sure.
balance between guests and you self-hosting is key. You don't want it to just be, if you're using this as like nurturing and thought leadership, you really want to make sure that people see you as a
Sure.
thought leader and not the people who you're bringing on.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's kind of quite selfishly what I did with this show. I mean, we tend to
Working
do
great.
one guest episode a week and one solo episode. So it
Yep.
means every now and then I can pretend I know what I'm talking about when it comes to websites and SEO. And then I'll bring in guest experts like yourself to share marketing tips for the audience. So yeah, I like that. Now, you mentioned you'll start, the way you started it was to do it internally with your own team, showcase that you're experts in your field, share obviously useful insights to your audience, and build up that trust, build up that credibility in the market. How do you prove the concept? How do you know, what are some things to look out for to say, yep, this webinar is doing well. Let's keep it going. Let's not axe it. And when the CEO or the CMO is putting pressure on you, saying, well, it's been a few weeks now. We spent quite a lot of money on this. Can you show me some results? What should we look out for?
Yeah. I mean, we look at registrants who are signing on every week, but then we also look at new contacts that are being brought on that weren't necessarily in our database beforehand. So those are two like leading indicators that we look at first. And then we also look at, as best we can, repeat attendees. So people who are showing up to more than one or two or three, and showing like if we're seeing a really high number of people who are attending almost every week or engaging with our content pretty frequently, I also see that as a good indicator that this is working really well. We also did do a survey out to our registrants and attendees, like probably like a month and a half or 2 months in, just to kind of get a feel of like, what do you like? What don't you like? How many of you attended? Just kind of to get some feedback and also some topic feedback.
Sure.
And the testimonials we got were amazing. Like people just loved us. They were just raving about us, which was great. So like being
Yeah.
able to just show like, here's our target audience, and here's someone from this school who we've been trying to get in front of like for 3 years, and they just said that this is their number one thing that they look forward to every week. Like having those testimonials and those like prospect stories is usually a winner when you talk to your CMO or CEO.
Yeah. I mean, if you can prove to, I suppose, leadership in your company that you're building up, nurturing these relationships with target key accounts, I don't think there's going to be too much pushback, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Good stuff. So you said you have got some tips for when you're ready to get guests on the on your webinar. What
Hmm.
are some things that we should consider when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think having a wish list is really good of influencers and people in your industry that you want to bring on. And we kind of first approach people who we could see a mutual relationship with. We're like, we're going to do this one thing for you. And we know that they'll see the plus of kind of getting that additional exposure. So we approach it as like, hey, we just love your content. We would really love to have you on as a guest. Here are some results and some feedback we've been getting on this
Yeah,
webinar. We'd love to kind of just have an open conversation to see if this is a good fit. So we started it with that and just seeing like, hey, we just are admirers of you. We really like your content and we'd like to get you on the show with no ask back. It's just more of like getting them on, building that relationship. And so far, it's been hit or miss if people are like interested in it. But
sure.
those who are interested are, blown away that it's not a PowerPoint and it's just like droning on about whatever. They love the audience interaction that they get because for them too, that's probably within their target audience too. And they're getting
Yeah,
exposure, they're getting feedback. Um, but then they just love that interaction and it's fun and it's exciting. And then we package it up and send it over to them afterwards. And they love that because then they're also getting free content without really having to do too much.
yeah. I mean, for them, I can't really see any negatives for it, as it's almost free promotion and
Right.
positioning them as an expert in their space in front of most likely their target audience. So
Yeah.
over time, they're probably going to win some business off it eventually, if not quite quick in the medium to long term, especially with the ongoing promotion and repurposing of content and things. So it's
Yeah.
almost a
Ideally.
no-brainer for most people.
Exactly.
Which, just like this podcast, a lot of the guests that come on over time, they'll pick off some business off the back of it.
Right.
Just because
Exactly.
we'll remarket it pretty well. So yeah, it makes sense. So okay, so we've kind of prepped everything. We've thought about the format. We've thought about the guests we're reaching out to. Um, what comes next? Do we start promoting and marketing the show, or do we dive into actually doing some recordings? Or
I mean, I think at first, kind of diving in and testing it out. And then once you get rolling a little bit, I think that's a good time to start really pushing and marketing it. So we probably didn't do promotion outside of like our usual social media and stuff until like a month in, just so we could have testimonials, feedback, some numbers, so we could create a little FOMO in our advertisements of the webinar.
yeah,
Um, so, kick off first, test it out, see what that initial reaction is from just your existing database, at least at first. And then use that early on traction to kind of help grow and promote the webinar.
got it, got it. And from your experience, Nicole, is there a good duration that you should aim for, like 30 minutes, an hour, or anything along that
Yeah,
lines, or does it depend?
I think it depends. We usually, like minimum, I think 30 minutes is good, but we do like to open up so that like we try to have our topics cover at least 30 minutes of some sort of discussion. And
Yep.
if it, goes longer and it's a good discussion, we're happy to go over. So we lock out an hour for our sessions and in people's calendars, but some are 30 minutes, some are 45. I think anything under an hour, because once it hits an hour, people are start like looking at their watches and they've got other places to go.
Sure.
Um, but minimum 30, max an hour.
Yeah.
And just let the
Yeah.
conversation kind of flow.
Cool. Okay, got it. And in terms of actually getting those signups, it sounds like you've had some great success. I know you mentioned one of the first one was sold out. So was it initially you just did it on organic side of things with no paid behind it, i.e. perhaps emailing to email lists, perhaps getting your team to put it on socials with images or videos and links in the comments, and when just so I can give the audience really tuning in some ideas on what you should
Yeah.
perhaps do from an organic front, and then what you should perhaps consider from a paid front.
Yeah. Yeah, we were really fortunate that we, sold out. It exceeded my expectations, honestly, of that first one. But we did first do, like an email blast to people who were in our database already, but we thought were specifically interested in that topic. And then we did do social media posts. So we did one on our brand, but we also had, like our salespeople and marketing and CEO kind of also promote it on their own social
Sure.
media networks. And then we just did boosted paid social
Okay.
to, like our followers and everything. So that was kind of the initial thing.
Yep.
I didn't want to put too much paid behind the first one, even though we ended up getting way too many eyes. But like, it's the first one, you don't know like how
Yeah.
it's gonna go. So I just wanted some initial traction so we could see how it resonated. So I wouldn't be too worried if someone's trying and they're not getting like a ton right away. It's fine. It's a buildup.
Yep.
And be okay with like you're testing it out. You're kind of figuring out the kinks first, and then start thinking about how can I put a strategy behind this to really gain some exposure and get this in front of new eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. I suppose it depends on the size of your company and where you're at, and on what the marketing you can do initially, and kind
Yeah.
of what you can put against paid. But I think starting small and then growing it over time, just like we did with this podcast. I mean, to start with, there was
Hmm.
hardly anyone listening, and as we've grown, as we've built up an audience, and as we've marketed it more heavily, more and more people tune in. So it's natural kind of progression. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
oh, sorry. And just to add on to that, I mean, because then you're chopping it up and putting it on social media, so they'll
Yep.
get some natural organic on that side too. And we always have in our like comments for all of our micro videos, like register for our series, and that also helps, just organically kind of grow registrants without you having to pay advertising to get there.
Excellent. So we've talked about it a bit, but let's dive a bit deeper into some of the replay value that you've seen when it comes to, okay, we've done the show, what can we do with it now? What's the max output we can get from it, and your recommendations?
Yeah, there's so much. Like we have so much content now from all these webinars that like I have to remind my team to like go back to previous webinars and make sure that like we're repurposing some of that content that we talked about. There might be like one little key nugget that was on this one topic that resonates now in July that maybe didn't resonate as much back in April just because of the cycle of the school system. So when we first finish up a webinar, I'll have my team go through and kind of like figure out which blocks that they want to chop up. We'll also put it on YouTube. We'll put it on, we'll embed that video onto a blog as well that kind of covers most of the topic. We put it on our podcast. So that's already, without us even chopping things up, like three channels that we're covering immediately with pretty
Yep.
low effort. And then there's the social video. So chopping it up for organic social, but also for your paid strategy too. So we have a schedule that's pretty regular in terms of like releasing a video and then having like a thought leadership piece later, and kind of putting those into rotation, branding them nice like you do here, making sure it's got a nice header and footer and people recognize that it's coming from our brand when it's in their news feed. So then people start
Got it.
anticipating it and know what to expect. And then using it for paid advertising in the same vein, like looking at how you can use those clips for different types of strategies that you're using for that demand capture strategy you have. So we sometimes repurpose some of the content to registrants of the webinar to kind of remind them like, oh, we had this
Okay.
great conversation. Maybe they missed it. We repurpose it into people who came to our website, people who are followers are of us, or we just do lookalike lists of current clients. And so there's a lot of opportunities, and I don't even think we've necessarily found all of the opportunities that can be
I
used
certainly
with the
haven't.
content.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
there's
think
just
it's,
so much, and there's only so much you can do.
I mean, when you're
It's
saying
really
things now,
endless.
it's giving me ideas. Like,
Yeah,
especially when you said like sending, because I do this every now and then. Like, if I've got a piece of content, rather than me explain to someone on a phone or a Zoom call for 5 minutes, I'll just say, look, I'll shoot you this video that literally gives you
right.
everything you need on this topic, and then you can watch or listen to it at your leisure. Um,
We,
so you've got all of that as
yeah,
well as the other ways.
exactly. Yeah, we send little micro clips to our SDRs and say like, here's, some micro clips that talk about this topic, or we had a client on as a guest, and so here's success stories of exactly how
Yeah.
they've used our product that came up naturally and organically, and just give them like a little bit of a library of video content where it's not us telling the story, it's someone else kind of explaining the story and us just being more of the thought leaders around it.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of stuff's great because it saves your sales team a lot of time because
Yeah,
they can send that to prospects or to customers to answer their questions, handle objections. And at the same time, it saves them time too, as well as all those good angles that you've talked about when it comes to marketing or putting paid behind it. So there's a lot of value
so
you can
much.
squeeze out of
Yes.
these things. But have you got any advice on frequency, Nicole? Is there like a frequent in terms of should companies start by doing one a month, or what are your recommendations
Yeah,
there?
I I mean, consistency is definitely key. I think one a month is a little too infrequent because people kind of forget. I think
Mm,
maybe every other week's a good start if you want to
right.
start there. But making sure that you have, when people sign up, they're signing up for all of them so that it's like a long event list and they don't have to re sign up every single time is probably
Got it.
key. I think if you have to push people to register every single week, they're not going to do it. So just having that reoccurring schedule. Similarly, like what Refine Lab does, we might have stolen that from them. But just making it as easy as possible for people to sign up and have that in their calendar is key.
Sure.
But yeah, I think especially depending on the size of your team and how many resources it is, like kicking it off, it's definitely can be time consuming at first until you kind of figure out that groove. So don't make it so hard where you're not able to keep it up, but make it consistent enough where you can continue to kind of grow that audience and get people engaged and knowing like, okay, every Tuesday at 2 p.m., like this is on, and can I make it this
Yeah.
week? Okay, yeah, like I'm going to join. So that they understand what that frequency looks like and when to come on.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So people get familiar with the time and date that you're gonna be
Hmm.
doing it, and it's not too far apart that you lose interest. Got it.
Yes. Yep.
For anyone that's listened so far and they thought this all sounds well and good, but I'm sure starting a webinar is going to be way too expensive. Is a webinar something that's going to break the bank? Can you do it on a budget from your experience?
Yeah, it's definitely budget friendly.
Okay.
I mean, if you can get a Zoom account of some sort, and then you just have the resources, whether that's a marketing person or maybe it's a salesperson, or we like to have, people who are um, like they really understand the industry on their subject
Sure.
matter experts. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yep.
Someone who really knows how to talk to that industry on there. So as long as you have a person and that can talk, someone who can handle the technical sides of it, and then you have the Zoom accounts, and there's a little bit of spend when it comes to paid, but also like video editing if you need to outsource that or if you have it in house. But honestly, I think it's very budget friendly, and you can kind of make it work within whatever budget you have.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, from what you've shared there, it sounds like probably similar to a podcast, perhaps where as long as you've got the Zoom webinar account and you've got webcams, your team have got mics, you've got an
Yep.
industry expert, you've got someone to assist with the production side of things, then you're pretty much good to go and you can start getting people to sign up and scale it as you grow.
Yep, exactly. And that start investing more in it, get better mics, get better cameras, but you can start with your computer camera and your little earphones and just see how it goes.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, I think we've covered this nicely, Nicole, in terms of kind of getting started on webinars, how to do them, kit you need, and the success they can bring for businesses. Is there anything you've missed that we feel is kind of quite important that we've not yet covered?
I think those are the key points in terms of getting started and
Yeah.
why. There is the aspect of as it grows and it nurtures, and you're getting like a lot of people who are coming on, it's a really good facilitator to building a community. So I've used it in other aspects where like I ended up driving them to more of like a private Facebook group or LinkedIn group where we could continue this conversation. They would get more exclusive content there.
Right.
We would share things, but then we were starting to house like a community of people who are your ICP and you can contact them only, and that's it. So there is some ways to leverage, the growth and nurturing that you have in webinars to start facilitating community growth, which is a whole nother kind of strategy and discussion probably for another day.
Sure.
But I've just seen really good success. Everybody's always talking about like, how do I build community? I don't really understand how to do it. Webinars is like a key building block, and I've seen really great success in kind of building that strategy with webinars.
Got it. So directing people to another channel be it like a
Hmm.
Facebook group or a Slack group is that
Somewhere
gonna give
else.
them kind of more of the same? And I guess then you can communicate with them a lot more frequently than you could on the webinar and engage with
Yep.
them and offer
Yeah,
various
exactly.
goodies
So
and
just another
insights.
avenue for them to have conversations, forums, continue the conversation.
Yeah,
Need to make sure you have someone who's like helping facilitate that and stuff.
sure.
But it's an easy leap. So like once you've already got people enjoying your content, coming frequently, it's a very easy leap to get them over onto a private community board of some sort.
Makes sense. Awesome. Nicole, thanks very much. Really appreciate you coming
Yeah.
on, sharing how to build a community through webinars. With
Yeah.
that
Thank you.
said, please do tell us more about how everyone tuning in can learn from you, connect with you, and anything you'd like to point our audience to.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. Just follow me on LinkedIn. I post there pretty frequently. I like to network and, connect with people of all types of marketing. I love talking about marketing all day long. And yeah, that's pretty much where the best place you can find me.
Awesome. And we'll put the links there over in the show notes at businessgrowth.marketing. And with that, thank you once again, Nicole. Enjoy the
Yeah,
chat.
thank you. Thanks. Me too.
No worries. And as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, why not leave us a quick rating if you're tuning in on the audio podcast, or if you're on YouTube, a quick subscribe goes a long way. And with that said, we'll catch you on the next episode for more actionable marketing tips to grow your business and grow your revenue. Cheers for tuning in.